For only $100, I attempted to build a gaming PC, which isn't even enough to buy a single stick of RAM these days. And if I'm being honest, it's one of the hardest things that I've done in a long time. Our goal going into it was to be able to play games like Fortnite and Valorant at around 100 FPS, and hopefully, fingers crossed, get close to 30-ish FPS in games like Arc Raiders and Cyberpunk 2077. And we try to do this using only online shopping because we're not gonna count some crazy once-in-a-lifetime deal that some random person found on Facebook. Now, as we start our search, we're going for the tried and true method of taking an office PC, slapping in a graphics card, and seeing if it can play games. But here's where things start to fall apart. For this PC to even have a chance at playing games, we need a decent CPU, at least 16 gigabytes of RAM, and an SSD. Oh, not to mention the fact that the case needs to also be able to fit a graphics card inside it. And at this price, it felt pretty impossible. I spent hours searching literally everywhere. Whether I was at my desk, on my phone, or even outside watching my kid play. And every single time, it was a struggle to find any deals. 8th gen Intel CPUs, impossible for this price range. So I dropped down to 6th gen Intel, which in a normal PC economy would have definitely worked. But they were either way overpriced or missing key components like RAM or SSD, so they just weren't an option. So I only had two options. Go over the $100 budget and defeat the entire purpose of the video, or take something like a 4th gen i5 and just pray that it's enough to start some games. And honestly, this is where I thought the video would come to an end. So I took the risk and spent $52.22 on the Office PC, because it was literally the only option I could find. But even this PC had two major problems that were gonna throw a major wrench in this project. It was missing an SSD, and it was a small form factor case, which means most GPUs won't even fit inside this thing. So now we were left with doing something absolutely crazy to get this thing to even have a chance at playing games. Because we only had $47.78 left in our budget, we still needed an SSD and a GPU. So things were not looking good, because in case you didn't know, SSDs are also really expensive right now in the current market. And after more stressful searching, I got lucky. When I checked eBay one day, there was a listing for only like $17 plus shipping. So I was able to get a 256 gigabyte SSD for $22.39. Definitely not amazing, but now at least we had a chance. With $25 left for a GPU, we just had to pray we could find some sort of deal. The problem is we needed a low profile graphics card. And for whatever reason, these are even more expensive than normal GPUs. And the used GPU market prices have also soared during this crazy time we're living in. So that left me with a crazy idea. Let's use a GPU that's not even meant for gaming. A workstation card, which is either going to be too weak or way too expensive. But after doing some research, I found some middle ground. A GPU from 2014 that may give us a chance to save this build and actually play some games. It's the AMD FirePro W5100. It's got 4 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory, and even though it has really old drivers, I still think some games can launch, and we still have a chance at our goal. The only problem is, I don't even know if it'll fit in the case, but it's the only shot we got. So got it ordered and it's on the way. All right, so now we got everything here. So let's take a look at the parts and see if we got what we actually paid for. Starting with the GPU, it is the W5100. It is the AMD FirePro. Now, if we flip it over on the back, hopefully we can see this. It is the 4 gigabyte version. I'm not sure they make any other version, but we are going to probably run into a problem that we'll have to tackle here in just a minute. Then we have our SSD, and this is a SanDisk SSD. It is only 256 gigabytes. So Windows, maybe Valorant and Fortnite might be the only thing that we could do on here. Now, a lot of people would say, well, just get a cheap HDD and you could store more games on it. A lot of games are not running on HDDs anymore, so SSD is your best option. And last but not least, we have the actual Office PC itself. So let's open it up, see what we got. Oh my gosh, there's a GPU in here. I don't
remember if there was a GPU on the listing or not, but let's kind of take this thing apart and see if we got what we paid for.
So inside the PC here, the first thing I want to do is take off the cooler and see if it actually has the CPU that we paid for. So I had to wipe off the old crusty thermal paste, and sure enough, we have a crappy i5 4590. Definitely not the greatest CPU in the world, but theoretically can launch games. And of course we checked both our RAM sticks to make sure that we had 16 gigs like we paid for. And after slapping on some fresh thermal paste and putting the cooler back on, we wanted to see if the PC would actually boot before we even tried the graphics card. And it was actually a very scary experience.
All right, so we got everything plugged up. No GPU right now, we're just using the integrated graphics, and we're gonna see if it'll boot.
But luckily we did get a post, and our SSD somehow had Windows already installed.
As I was afraid of, our boy Grayson Stolly or Stale or whatever is logged in here. I have a password on it, so I can't really do anything.
So I had to go through a bunch of steps to reinstall Windows and get all this crap off of it so we could actually use the SSD, which took way longer than what I wanted.
All right, now that we got the PC booted, we're into Windows, we're ready to kind of rock and roll. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn it off and see if we can get this graphics card inside this PC and see if it will actually work.
Now typically this is the funnest and best part of building a game PC, but unfortunately this graphics card is a little bit too wide. So I had to kind of make sure everything was pushed out of the way so that I could line it up in the PCIe slot and plugged it up. And you can see this thing is pretty janky looking. I mean, it looks pretty rough, but thankfully it did post and we can actually see that it is kind of working.
All right, well, if I have life, everything seems to be working correctly, but this PC is kind of a mess. So we're gonna see if we can make it look a little bit more presentable, and then we'll see if it can play some games.
So the plan here is to do some case modifications, and we're gonna start by cleaning up these cables a little bit. I started by taking a little tiny screw and mounting the SSD inside this cage. Now this cage was mainly made for an HDD at the time, and so we just kind of had to do the best we can, but I got one of the holes to line up and screwed it into place. Next, we wanted to take the side panel and line it up to see exactly where we would need to cut the case so that the graphics card had room to hang out the side. Now, this is not going to be a perfect cut by any means, but we just did the best we can. So I took a knife and kind of scratched out a little bit of where I needed to make cuts, because I definitely didn't want to make it too narrow and risk any part of the case touching the GPU and shorting anything out. But now for the fun part. We're going to throw on our safety goggles, go outside, and take our handy little skill saw thing. I actually don't even know what you would call this, but it's probably not really made for this, even though it says it can cut through steel. We had a lot of issues. So my first attempt at cutting, it made it about halfway into the first little strip of metal, and the blade I was using completely broke. I only had 2 blades left, so it made me extremely nervous, so I took my time with the rest of the cuts, but eventually got more comfortable using this tool cutting into the metal side panel. Then we finally were able to break through and get a nice little cutout here.
It's definitely not super clean, and that's probably gonna be pretty sharp. Probably need to like sand it or something.
Luckily, I did have some 80 grit sandpaper laying around, so I did take the edges and try to at least knock the really sharp parts off so that I wouldn't cut myself accidentally and that it wouldn't be a huge hazard either way. So we got the side panel back to the room and we put it on, and I think it turned out pretty nice. Not perfect by any means. I'm definitely not a super skilled person with these power tools trying to cut into metal, but I'm happy with the way that it turned out. But now for the ultimate test. Can this thing play games? Now, before you can play games on any PC, you've got to let Windows do its updates and install graphics drivers, which I did that and decided to go play Fortnite as our first game, and it crashed
Like multiple times it crashed. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me what the issue was, and I really thought we were just gonna have to stop right here. But before we gave up completely, I decided to do some research and see if this was a common issue with this graphics card. It turns out that Windows decided to install its own driver from 2015. Which is only 1 year after the graphics card even launched. So I ended up having to download this program called DDU. It stands for Display Driver Uninstaller. This allows me to wipe all drivers off my system, and I can also click a box that prevents Windows from installing its own drivers. And after I did this, I was able to go to AMD's official website and download their official driver, and hopefully this time we were able to get into a game of Fortnite. This time when we loaded Fortnite up, it actually made it to the loading screen, but it stayed there for a very long time. Even MSI Afterburner loaded and showed me all of my stats, but the game eventually gave us a different error code than what we got last time. So it was back to do some more research, and it turns out that the latest driver for this GPU doesn't work well with a lot of games. So what we had to do was go to AMD's website and go to a different driver, and we just went backwards one at a time until we found one that would actually launch the game so that we could test out Fortnite. Honestly, after all of that, I had very low expectations going into the game of Fortnite that our FPS would hold up at all. Remember, our goal is to get 100 FPS. And on the battle bus, it looked like we were gonna struggle. In fact, when I jumped out of the battle bus, our 1% lows dropped to 2, which is not very playable at all. But luckily, after we landed and we looted for a while, things were starting to load in and our CPU usage finally went under 100. Now, was this the smoothest experience of my life? Probably not. And there were times where we still dropped under 100 FPS, but there was also times where we were over 100 FPS. And the average seemed to be settling around 95 or 97. So I guess technically we failed this challenge. But up next is Valorant, and Valorant could be the game that gets us the 100 FPS. And luckily Valorant came through. Yeah, there were a few times we dipped below 100, but it was very rare. Our 1% low stayed around 40-ish for the most part the entire time, and our FPS was close to 100 to 120 throughout most of the match. So we can't be too disappointed in that, but now we've got to try the more demanding games like Cyberpunk and Arc Raiders. We tried Cyberpunk 2077 next, and it was pretty rough. At 1080p with AMD FSR on the lowest preset, we were not able to get above like 22 FPS. We even tried the Steam Deck profile to see if that would help, and it was pretty much exactly the same. So I guess you could count this one as a loss, but just for fun, I did lower the resolution down to 720p, and bam, we got 36 FPS, which was pretty awesome. But then we hopped over to Arc Raiders, and it was a struggle. We got a warning that this wasn't a supported GPU, which, you know, is probably understandable. And we tried a bunch of different like upscaling techniques, and they were all pretty bad and didn't really help us that much unless you wanted like a super fuzzy, grainy experience. But at 1080p with the render resolution lowered down to like 720p-ish, we were able to get like 35 to 40-ish FPS, which I think is pretty decent, and so I'm gonna give it a check mark here. You let me know what you think about it down in the comments, and if you want to see me put this $100 PC to the test by gaming on it for an hour in ranked game modes, you need to go check out Matt Miller Gaming, which is my second channel where we live stream and chat it up over there.